really interesting. So I thought to kick things off, could you sort of tell me a bit about your role as education chief? I think that is right, at UNICEF.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so I'm the global chief of education. It means I spearhead UNICEF education's work at the global level. UNICEF is a highly decentralized organization, so the emphasis is our capacity and our work at country level. And as you may know, we're in all lower and middle income countries. We have 127 offices throughout the world. So at headquarters, we set our strategic direction in education. We backstop, provide technical assistance. We build partnerships. Basically, we're in a supportive role for our work at country level.
And are there any specific countries that you work on, or are you overseeing things? I saw that previously, before you had this role, that you worked in Uganda, Bangladesh, India. So do you sort of now specialize in any of those, or is it an overview of?
I don't in this capacity. So at the global level, we're working globally, but then we have 7 regional offices, and they're more geographic focused. We have a regional office in Eastern and Southern Africa, one in Western Africa, one in South Asia. And so there's education staff there, and they then focus on those regions, and then we have country level. So we kind of have the 3 tiers. And at the global level, we're supposed to be setting kind of overall global guidance, global direction, global engagement.
And the work that you've done over the time you've been working there, over 20
5 years now.
25.
Yeah.
Oh, more than I've been alive.
Oh gosh, thanks for that. Yeah.
The progress in education in these countries you work in has been huge. Does it sort of feel now that, oh my God, with this pandemic has hit, it's sort of going to reverse things again?
Well, Rachel, it's a great question. And a lot of people are talking about this and we're reflecting on this. I would summarize that we have, in the 25 years I've been in this work and have the privilege to serve in various countries with UNICEF, indeed, we've seen great progress in education. Rachel, most of the progress has been more children in school, and that is no small feat, including gender parity at primary level, and significant. Basically, all countries in the world have seen some expansion in children in school in the last 25 years. However, we were experiencing a global learning crisis even prior to the pandemic, in the sense that although many, many more children were in school than ever before, we were still missing some children, and some children were still not going to school. And in actual fact, the increase in enrollment had stagnated in the last 10 years. But the big challenge remained the quality of the education and the learning levels. And many of us feel the gap between the skill set that you graduate from, the skill set that you have when you graduate, and the skill set that's required to enter the labor market, to start a company, to engage with your community, that gap has grown, meaning children in general, on average, are falling even farther behind in the skills that the education system are enabling them to ascertain or acquire and what's required. So that was what we were calling a learning crisis, UNICEF and many others, prior to the pandemic. And then to your point on the pandemic, indeed, at the height of the pandemic, maybe you've seen those numbers, but we had 1.5 billion children throughout the world that have had their education disrupted. It's 90% at one point at the height of it, which was inconceivable before the pandemic, that would even be a scenario that we had to plan for. So that has again exacerbated the challenges we're facing in terms of learning levels and learning outcomes, despite great efforts in remote learning that are currently being employed all over the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think we see a lot of, I ran a half marathon for a charity called Street Child. I'm sure you've heard of it. They focus on getting kids in school, and that's an easy thing to recognize. We all go to school, but that learning crisis you spoke about was something that hadn't really come to my attention. So what is it that you guys have been doing to address that? So
still getting kids in school is critically important, like I mentioned, especially considering vulnerable children, adolescent girls in many countries. we're needing to continue to laser focus on ensuring every children has an opportunity to get to school and participate in school. But there has been a shift in the past few years, definitely more recently, on quality. And we have a range of work and actions that we're doing to improve the quality. It starts, Rachel, with measuring learning outcomes and enabling teachers and facilitators and kids and to change and adapt their learning, their teaching, based on what kids are learning and which children are learning and which children require more support. So there's a lot of emphasis now on measuring learning and measuring the skills that children are acquiring and adapting. There's a newfound excitement around technology, and I think there's enormous amounts of potential, particularly now with new and innovative apps and learning platforms, and many are showing great promise. And many are showing to be equalizers, if you'd like, that with the access to technology, vulnerable children, marginalized children, children that have struggled can catch up and that has a potential, I think, to step change quality. And there's lots of also new and innovative approaches to deliver pedagogy, if you like, delivering learning curriculums, how to support teachers, how to support schools, all of which are increasingly showing the pathway. Now the challenge is just the scale. How do we take these innovations and take these proven initiatives that are improving learning outcomes and take them at scale across the world to all schools? Because we've got to be careful not to make the mistake of, this has been an interesting initiative, it's reached 5 schools or 50 schools, and yet the scale of the challenge is phenomenal. So taking these innovations at scale is our #1 priority now.
So you think it's been a shift to sort of practical ways of learning? I spoke to someone before in Nigeria who does sort of STEM programs with girls and those sorts of things. Do you think, I mean, maybe naturally as the world has been taken over by technology, you might not think it is, but in these countries as well, that shift is coming to light? Or
I think practical or skill-based, and perhaps a shift away from knowledge for knowledge sake, or definitely a move away from memorization of facts. As we all know now, all facts are on our fingertips. So shifting towards skills. Now, the whole range of skills, from foundational skills, reading, writing, math, etc., but transferable skills are 21st century skills. I don't know if you heard those terms, but it's like creative problem solving, working in groups, communication. These transferable skills that can be applicable across different careers and across different occupations are proving absolutely critical. And that feedback with the private sector and our partnerships with companies that's the key skills. Those are the key skills, these transferable skills. Many companies are saying we can train on the technical, unique skills for our business. But if students can graduate with that range of transferable and 21st century skills, be an enormous asset for them and for growth and economic development. So we are focusing on that shift, and I think you will see that shift in education over time more and more, focusing on these transferable skills, and in a sense, complex problem solving, accessing the knowledge that is available in the public domain, interpreting it from multiple sources, and then understanding how to take action. I think that's where a lot of the excitement is resting now.
That's engaging as well for
Absolutely.
children at hand, and sort of nothing. It's hard to say positive things coming out of the pandemic, but for Western schools, they're saying it's kind of a positive shift for the teachers because it's making them realize how they can utilize technology. And maybe we should have been, those older teachers who were sort of not wanting to embrace it. But that's a tricky thing for the developing world. And I saw in Sierra Leone at their best efforts that they've been broadcasting things over the radio for those who don't have access, and that's great. Do you think that this is what sort of issues or good things have you seen in terms of technology in these countries during the pandemic?
I think it's a great question. We have seen, overall, we've seen a new openness to more innovative approaches. So that's a huge opportunity. Education tends to be quite a traditional sector. It's steeped in tradition and long-standing, and it's a huge workforce, and so it tends almost by definition to be challenging to change very quickly, which is maybe not a bad thing, but as long as incremental change is seen. We see during with the school closures, and now with so many different initiatives to enable remote learning. And just by the way, when you mentioned radio, radio and TV have shown great promise, and it's been the most popular tool that's been used in low resource countries, but also even lower tech solutions like delivering learning materials to homes, and all the way up to IT-enabled, computer-based apps, etc. So the full range. So I think many school systems, many senior decision makers in education are seeing, okay, so there's all these different opportunities that we can now, in this new openness to that, we can bring them also into the school system when schools reopen. And that, I think we have a great opportunity now, potentially a once in a generation opportunity, to learn from this experience and end up, when we're reopening schools and the planning of reopening schools, incorporate some of the best practices into the school system. The other thing is reaching the most vulnerable. We learned from West Africa in the school closures related to Ebola, some of which were 6 months, one was 9 months in one country, that it's absolutely critical for us to proactively reach the most vulnerable with remote learning, but also with the planning and the reopening. Otherwise, we run the risk of children never coming back. And we saw significant numbers of adolescent girls in particular in West Africa not returning to school when they reopened after 6 month or 9 month school closures at that time. So another big challenge that we're all working on is reaching the most vulnerable, and with remote learning, but also planning on proactively enabling them to return to school. The third thing that, so one is on learning, two is on reaching the most vulnerable. The third is on how do we leverage the school as a platform to reach broader holistic needs of children beyond learning. And that's proven critical. That was critical post Ebola in West Africa. It's proving critical now. And that's the their social emotional health. This has been an incredibly trying time for children, but also their nutrition needs, school feeding, water and sanitation, protection. When the schools open their front door and children come back in, we're hoping, and we're working very hard to ensure their holistic needs are met as well.
That kind of links to something I was going to ask you, in that I'm sure you'll agree with me. Everything ultimately boils down to education, because the tech that we've spoken about, the healthcare, understanding all of these different aspects of life, you need education to do that. Do you think that because of this, it's sort of made us realize maybe we need a new narrative around education and the importance of all of the things, healthcare, all of these things that are so important right now? Ultimately, we wouldn't have these without the education first.
I think it's absolutely a key point, and that's something we're engaging in right now, is to promote exactly that message. It's critical for the individual. It's critical for each individual child to realize their full potential. And if we can proactively reach the most vulnerable and the marginalized, it can be a very significant equalizer, and promote greater equity in societies. It's also an engine for medium and long-term growth. I must admit, we are very concerned now with the fiscal pressure that understandably all countries, including in developed and Western countries and in the global South, are facing. And their prioritization around restarting the economy is understandable. Their prioritization around health is understandable, recognizing it was a health crisis initially. But we are very concerned that they may compromise their medium and long-term potential by meeting immediate fiscal demand. So we're working hard to find solutions to that challenge.
And there's been, loads of shocking stats already about the impact that this is having on. And I was wondering if you could tell me about things that you're doing, and you've had to, I'm sure, adapt very quickly. I saw that in the Ivory Coast, I think it's been the cocoa season. So those children who are out of school, there's been worry that they're helping, child labour is happening because they're not in school. And You could argue that it's not the family's fault. They need the money. They're not in school. What are you guys doing to help with these issues that are going on?
So it's so we've learned a lot from previous. I mean, UNICEF's strength is in fragile and humanitarian contexts, and as I said, we work all over the world. But we definitely prioritize those children that are most in need, and those are children that have experienced crises before. And based on those lessons, the key actions we're promoting in order to reach the most vulnerable are, first, it comes back to what I mentioned before on data. We need to understand which children are experiencing particular challenges, which one are at higher risk of not returning to school, and at school level, tracking that very carefully and encouraging proactive attention to them. We are looking at how do we, this back to these holistic needs, understanding the challenges that these children face. As you mentioned, in some countries, it's children because of economic reasons they're not coming back to school or getting pulled out of school. So we need to address those challenges at household level. Others are fearful of violence to and from school or in school. So understanding what are the risks for vulnerable children and addressing those. We also need to, there are some policy initiatives that we're engaging with governments around. For example, waiving any entry requirements, whether those be school fees or uniforms or other potential barriers to accessing school. We also need engagement and set up platforms between school officials, principals, community leaders, parents, children themselves. And it's the sense of solidarity at community level to find solutions to the challenges they're facing, with a vision that everyone, or kind of an objective, if you like, which everyone shares, of the importance of ensuring all children return to school and realize their full potential. So, we've taken these lessons and are applying them now in all the contexts in which we work.
Yeah, and some of the stats about child marriages already in some countries are just shocking. But it sounds like you've done this for years and years. You are prepared. And I saw an article that you shared from your colleagues on Twitter, and the headline was "How prepared are global education systems for global crises?" And I was wondering how you felt that UNICEF were and you guys were for this. I mean, like you said before, you had swine flu and Ebola and those sorts of things, but how prepared are we for them, for education?
So, we spent a lot of time preparing for, and we spent a lot of resources and have adopted a lot of lessons in preparing for crises. I must admit, a crisis of this scale, it was just so exceptional that it really did require almost a rethink of, 1.5 billion children school affected. These are numbers that would have been unheard of. So now the lessons that we can draw for future is going to be critical, and we're spending some time working that out. Having said that, one of the really reassuring things I've seen is the solidarity or the renewed partnerships at global level, across the global education community, a whole bunch of different agencies, with governments, with donors, with thought leaders, etc., on kind of stepping up to this challenge in education, but also at country level, under many times, if not almost all times, under the coordination and leadership of governments. The entire education community has come together and brought their best game, if you'd like, and are doing their best to solve all the challenges or overcome the challenges. And we've seen, you've mentioned some examples, but like you've seen in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or in Somalia, or in even in other countries, you've got very proactive initiatives to deliver education online or through the radio. In Somalia, we've uploaded learning software and learning tools onto solar-powered tablets and made them available to children. Video lessons are being shared in Somalia through social media channels and through things like WhatsApp and Facebook. In Timor-Leste, we've introduced the learning passport, and that's a really innovative tool again to provide world-class quality education to all children. So these are just little snapshots of examples of what's possible now, and also what's showing the way for the future.
Have you had to be careful to sort of protect the budget for education? Because I'm sure that when this, you know, like you say, it was completely unprecedented, and you sort of have to slow down when you're thinking about what you're doing in all of the countries that you work with. Was that ever a problem that you had to?
So it's a great, I mean, because we were experiencing a global learning crisis prior to the pandemic, and now with the additional challenge of the pandemic, we didn't really have the luxury of rationalizing or postponing, or because we were kind of a crisis on top of a crisis.
Yeah.
So what has been absolutely critical is to ensure that we maximize the use of every dollar and maximize its impact. And that means taking the best practices from some countries, applying them to other countries. It means monitoring very carefully how our resources are spent, resources in terms of financial, but also how we're spending our time and who we're engaging with, and working very closely with other partners. And so we bring our comparative advantage and we complement it with others. So we're kind of employing all these different strategies to maximize our impact. That's really the focus right now. It's not really rationalizing, but in the sense of holding back, but actually going all in, because we're at such a critical point in education, but ensuring that we maximize our benefit and results.
I've just got 2 more questions for you, because I think I've only got you for half an hour. Not got you, that sounds. So first one is, what's been the biggest challenge for you since the pandemic hit? I sort of hate that phrase now because it's used everywhere, but.
I think the biggest challenge has been just the sheer scale. At the height, so say 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, I must admit, it feels like years now, I'm sure for you as well, but we had provided support to all 127 UNICEF country offices, and we were engaging with all 127 UNICEF offices on responding to remote learning. And so it's just the scale. And having served in 7 different UNICEF country offices, in pretty much all in low and fragile settings, I know how the impact would be quite profound on children that were already in challenging circumstances. So it was the scale, and then it was an understanding of already the vulnerable state that many children are in many countries. And if we cannot meet their needs, we may indeed lose them from education forever. So that's what kept a lot of us up at night. It kept me up at night. I have been really not necessarily surprised, but definitely overwhelmed by how much effort has been put in by governments and partners and ourselves on enabling remote learning. But of course, there's still so much to do. Now shifting to reopening, I come back to the once-in-a-generation opportunity to leverage the reopening process to kind of leapfrog education to the next century, to modernity, if you like, or to address long-standing issues. So that's also, we're coming into an exciting time now.
And the final question is, have you seen any benefits that have come out of this? For some people, they're saying it's, you know, because it's making you rethink all of these structures that we had in place. And I spoke about technology being one of them for people embracing technology. Have you seen any?
I'd say it's hard to talk about benefits when it's such a challenging situation for so many. But if there's any silver linings, I would say, and I mentioned it before, this openness now to new and innovative approaches to learning. I think there is continued recognition of the importance of education and learning. So that's also been reassuring. We've seen very strong partnerships and at the global level and at country level. And that's something we can leverage moving forward. And as you say, I think we also now have an opportunity to reach more children. And we do have some anecdotal evidence that children are learning for the first time through remote learning, meaning through the radio or TV, children are now learning when they were not in school before. And so initiatives like this can be a great opportunity for us to leverage as we move forward.
Great. Well, it's always good to end on a positive note anyway.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Georgina, and keep in touch. And all the best. Stay safe.
Yeah. No, thank you for your time. It's been great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.